The 1970s. There was just something in the air. Well, all right, there was a lot of stuff in the air, and some of it smelled mighty funny. That might account for the strange phenomena that occurred in the first half of the disco era, where seemingly normal people and upstanding members of polite society were inexplicably transformed into mute, shambling mounds of rotting vegetable matter. It happened quickly, it was very messy, and some of us would never eat a Brussels sprout again. So what's it all about, Alfie? Join me now as I walk you through Swamp Men of the Swingin' Seventies.
Breakfast!
Good morning and welcome to Comics for Breakfast. I'm your host, Jason Mink, and let's get right to it. Swamp creatures in popular literature are nothing new. Writer Theodore Sturgeon first put this concept to the page in his 1940s short story, It. You know the drill. Man dies in swamp. Swamp exerts its weird influence over the years and reanimates the corpse into a kind of shadowy half-life. The story proved popular and has been reprinted countless times over the years. Its influence was seen early on. Pre-code horror had plenty of sump-dump reanimated corpses rising to terrorize those who'd wronged them, and tracing mud all over our nice clean floors in the process. The most notable of these early swamp-born monsters would have to be Solomon Grundy, although Grundy's more or less humanoid appearance and consistent conflict with superheroes makes him more of a supervillain than your typical swamp monster, and he'll be tabled for this discussion. Sorry, buddy. More to the point are actual slabs of ambulatory sewage characters like Marvel Comics' The Glob. Escaped convict Joe Timms dies in a swamp chock full of radioactive pollution, which gives him the get up and go to tackle old Greenskin in The Incredible Hulk number 121. And while that was good, it wasn't quite the right fit for the decade yet to come. The dawn of the 1970s saw consumer tastes changing. The clam bake and body paint-based optimism of the late 1960s was replaced by something more verdant. The relaxing of the comics code at this time meant that publishers were once again free to create horror titles, and there was a rush to get new books to the newsstand. DC Comics seemingly took the high road, avoiding overt horror for more mystery and suspense-based stories, while Marvel went for more hard-hitting fare. It's not surprising they beat their distinguished competition to the punch. Kind of. While Marvel's Man-Thing character was first to market, he actually didn't appear in a standard comic book, but in the form of one of Marvel's new black and white magazines. And while this allowed Marvel a little bit of leeway in as far as what it could show, it arguably put the character outside of the Marvel universe, at least perception-wise. Thusly, DC was able to beat their competitor to the punch, getting their swamp creature into the four-color fold first. House of Secrets number 92, cover dated July of 1971, featured 6 stories. The first, Swamp Thing, is set in the 1800s. It concerns a doomed love triangle between friends Alex and Damien and the object of their mutual affection, Linda. After Alex and Linda marry, Damien dispatches his scientist friend in a lab accident and then moves in to comfort the little woman. Only Alex isn't ready to lie down just yet, and thanks to an injection of that swampy goodness, he's up and bopping around and killing those who've wronged him in no time. The story was well received, and DC updated it a few months later to reflect their more modern storytelling universe. And while I don't have number 1, I do have issue number 4. Hey, people talk about number 1 all the time. Whoever talks about issue 4? Let's get swampy. A plane shuttling passengers Abby Arcane and Matt Cable crashes in the Scottish Highlands. The first to stir is the plane's third passenger, a pontoon-riding stowaway, otherwise known as the Swamp Thing. Once Dr. Alec Holland, events similar to the original character's origin have positioned this new Swamp Thing on the outskirts of the DC universe. A carriage appears, bearing 2 decidedly odd ducks who seem more intent on salvage than rescue, but they bundle the plane's unconscious passengers into their wagon anyway, returning to their ancestral castle. Man, whenever I wake up after being in a crash, it's always tied up in some shed out in the middle of the woods. Swampy follows, watching events transpire through a window. The big guy sulks a bit, feeling sorry for himself before wandering off. Meanwhile, the pilot heads out to check the damage to his plane, although he's warned that the moors are a dangerous place and not to stray from the path. Seems familiar, but hey, sound advice often does. Of course, his impetuousness leads him straight to the slavering jaws of destruction in the form of a shadowy lupine beast. His scream is heard across the moors, and the others rush out to investigate. It seems something has torn the pilot's throat out, and it wasn't no dog. Our protagonists prepare to leave the next day, but it seems the horses bolted, and it looks like Abby and Matt are stuck here for another night. In the meantime, they meet the couple's son, Ian, who's a little odd himself. Later that night, the dog begins acting up, enough to get our already restless heroes to take a late-night fog walk. And hey, surprise, they meet the werewolf who killed their pilot last night. What are the odds? Swamp Thing jumps in to lend a hand, but he and his foe are fairly evenly matched. The comic isn't halfway over, so Swamp Thing conveniently falls into some quicksand. I mean, quicksand in Scotland, that checks out, right? Oh my god, apparently it does. Okay then, Swamp Thing is dead, and I guess it's an all-you-can-eat Scottish werewolf buffet. Cut to the castle, where, after a sumptuous dinner, Abby and Matt allow themselves to be drugged and dragged off. A little bit later, everyone wakes up, and hey, some mad scientist-level wackiness is about to go down. It turns out son Ian is a werewolf, and a transfusion of Matt's blood will theoretically fix the kid's lycanthropy. Hey, it's worth a shot, right? Turns out the family put the lanterns out on the moors at night to lure unwary air travelers into thinking that it was an airstrip. Hey, Craigslist hadn't been invented yet, I guess. Only Junior isn't Jake with innocence being used to cure him, and he wolves out. How long does the moon stay full in Scotland, anyway? In spite of his best intentions, the werewolf takes an interest in the now-bound Abby. As it's the third act, Swamp Thing returns, and he and old Harry begin to tussle. Only, how do you kill a werewolf when you're made of mud and twigs? The two begin to scrap, and in spite of having the home team advantage, the werewolf more or less whizzes it down his leg. His heart just isn't in it. Swampy spies the massive, ornate chandelier hanging above, especially its useful foot-long silver point. Hey, who wouldn't want to eat dinner under one of those? The pair's collective weight pulls the ornament down, impaling the werewolf. Huh. That was actually pretty easy, all things considered. With Ian dead and his parents' world and household shattered, Matt and Abby prepare to exit stage right, and Swamp Thing starts walking home? Anyone want to tell him he's going to get wet in the process? Nah, don't worry. He'll figure it out soon enough. Written by Len Wein and with art by Bernie Wrightson, Swamp Thing #4 is a quick but satisfying read. It hews close to familiar horror movie tropes, hitting all of the expected beats, but solidly and effectively. Even at this stage in his career, Wrightson's art is a knockout. His representations of the misty moors of Scotland are especially lovely. He creates an intense and immersive environment that makes this one float right to the top of the bog. Wait a minute. Doesn't sound quite right. While Swampy was the forerunner of the 70s Muckman, he wasn't the only contender. In fact, a legacy character would step up to the plate mere months later with a roomy eye towards taking back the title. October 12, 1918 saw German World War I flying ace Baron von Emmelmann shot down over Poland's Wassaw Swamp. The pilot was killed, but Emmelmann's desire to live miraculously was in harmony with the will of the swamp, and 20 years later, a strange new being known as the Heap emerged from the beshadowed fens. The character debuted in Hillman periodical's Air Fighters #3, dying by the end of the story but rising again and again in the following years. It's hard to keep a good Heap down. The character really got a boost in the early 1950s when horror comics took center stage on the spinner rack. Hillman continued to feature the Heap right up until the end of the company itself in the late spring of 1953. But that wasn't the end for the Heap. In March of 1971, Skywald Publications offered up their own unofficial take on the character with an updated backstory. They didn't bother to get rights or anything. They simply ran with the soggy mildewed ball. Their version of the Heap debuted in a black and white horror magazine. Sounds familiar? Skywald's Psycho. A few months later, the company released this square-bound comic featuring the character, which is what we're checking out today. Defying all laws of creation, the Heap exists! So states our breathless narrator as we're launched into one of the oddest adventures this side of breakfast. A beautiful young woman cavorts in a field of wildflowers. Then a lion shows up. Understandably terrified, the gal begins to run, with the king of the jungle hot on her heels. Only who does she fall face first into? Why, it's our title character, the Heap, lying resplendent in a flowery meadow. Now, I don't know about you, but when I usually think of monsters, I don't imagine them lazing about in fields of daisies. This is obviously my hang-up. The lion attacks, but the Heap just breaks its neck and tosses it aside like dirty laundry. It's got a now unconscious girl to leer at and presumably drip on. The Heap gazes down at her, taking a moment to consider her fragile beauty, almost as if it were human. Then, because unconsciousness typically only lasts a split second, the girl reawakens. Heapy's afraid she's going to lose it when she gets a good look at his, well, I hate to call it a face, but there we are, I guess. Amazingly, she doesn't pitch a fit. Turns out she's blind, which accounts for her not reacting in terror. But then she reaches out and touches him. Ever pick up fresh dog poop from the sidewalk in one of those plastic bags? Now imagine doing it sans bag. Before things can get any messier, 3 hunters show up and break up this little tete-a-tete. Their bounty lion may already be dead, but dang it, they're going to shoot something. And while their bullets pass harmlessly through the Heap's body, it's the hunter's words that wound. The Heap assures the readers that he does indeed have a heart, then dispatches the hunters brutally, presumably sulking off to play Twisted Sister at max volume in his teenage bedroom. Then we're treated to one of the most mercifully brief origins put to page. The Heap was once Jim Reynolds, a man we are led to assume drank lustily from the teat of life. While out crop dusting, Jim's stick freezes, and he veers wildly off course. Not to worry, though. That vat of condemned off-limits extremely dangerous chemicals should cushion his landing. But dang it all, the chemicals turn Jim into an ambulatory pile of night soil. Confused and more than a little bit disheartened by this turn of events, our now heapified protagonist splits the scene, mowing down an oncoming wave of soldiers in the process. Hey, this guy and the Hulk should get together. The heap takes shelter in a graveyard, but it's not long before he's discovered. No, not by two Wiccan chicks doing a ceremony out of their Subaru hatchback, but by the Grim Reaper, or at least someone cosplaying as him. Here dubbed Master Scythe, this guy and his tribe of Boglins? I don't wish to be indelicate here. Anyway, they want to recruit old Heapy for their little gang, but perish the thought. Heap isn't a monster. He's a man, aw, blah. And he tells Scythe to get to steppin'. They fight, but are too evenly matched to make any headway, and the villain and his charges vanish with a promise to return again. Our heaping hero and the blind girl then chase each other around a bit before ending up at, I kid you not, Dr. Frankenstein's house. Boy, this one's got it all, huh, kids? Turns out the girl's name is Sybil, and she's only hanging around because the doc promised to cure her blindness. Sadly, the doc is too obsessed with living up to his family name. Buddy, it's not healthy to compare yourself. That said, I think I had that poster. Cue the heap who knows an opportunity when he sees one. He writes his story out on the castle wall in his own brackish fluids, pleading with the doctor to restore him. Only Doc has other ideas. Work is hard, so instead of actually building a monster like his ancestor, Doc F will just pretend that he did, offering up the heap as proof. Now, I'm no scientist, but I think there'd be questions. Many difficult questions. As a gesture of goodwill, the Doc will fix Sybil's eyes, so the heap reluctantly agrees. 24 hours later, and it's showtime. Aided by an army of incredibly sophisticated medical robots of his own design, the Doc prepares to undertake the procedure. Why he doesn't just present these amazing robots to the scientific community instead of something that looks like he grew it in a septic tank, well, your guess is as good as mine, brother. Far be it from me to second-guess the genius here. Anywhoozle, Sybil's sight is restored, and she immediately flips out when she sees Heapy. The half a dozen empty-eyed automatons with whirring sharp scalpels clicking and bouncing about the storm-lit Gothic castle don't even register. Her issue is solely with the monster chained to the flippin' wall. Where's your sense of proportion, sister? Unsurprisingly, this causes the Heapmeister to flip out, and he smashes stuff up but good before storming off, presumably to write bad poetry on a wall somewhere with his poo finger. And it seems as though even the narrator has grown tired of this self-indulgent whinging, having a lightning bolt blast the title character to oblivion. Only, joke's on us, the Heap can't die. He's just too emo. What a ride, huh? Skywald provided more thrilling Heap adventures over in their Psycho magazine, but this was Heapy's sole foray into the four-color world. I know, I goofed on it pretty hard, but honestly, I loved the heck out of this book. The everything in the kitchen sink approach taken here is a blast. It's not even possible to see half of this stuff coming. Combine that with our protagonist's "oh, woe is me" approach to every encounter, and you end up with one of the most nutball fun books of the Silver Age. I can't say enough about The Heap. We conclude our bayou of breakfast with the most startling swamp creature of all. Wait, startling? Were the other adjectives taken? I get startled when the phone rings unexpectedly or someone sneaks up behind me. Using that term to describe an 8-foot-tall muck monster with burning red eyes and a Hoover attachment for a nose seems to be underselling the premise. But at any rate, it's Man-Thing number 5. And send in the clowns! This happy little fellow is Daryl. Okay, weird name for a clown, but that's all right. What matters is how funny he is. See him sitting quietly by the edge of the swamp. That's all right. I bet he's about to do something funny anyway. Well, it seems he's not a funny clown. He's one of those sad European-y ones, I guess. Still, if we're patient, I bet he's about to... Oh, my Lord! He shot himself! From a distance, Swamp Thing hears the gunfire. Wait a minute. Maybe he's the most startled swamp creature of them all. That makes way more sense here. Anyway, dead clowns and remembrance, huh? Manny recalls shards of past memories, splinters of a previous life driven deep into his mind's eye. The mute beast understands the dead need to be buried, so he shuffles off to find a nice place to plant his ever-ripening friend. We cut to town, where Richard Rory and Ruth Hart are introduced. Once again, the human characters in these stories are just the worst. As a kid, I hated cutting back to the supporting cast. I get it. They exist to give regular readers someone to identify with, but unless you're a 20-something writer at Marvel Comics in the early 1970s, some of this stuff doesn't really scan. These characters always seem to be sniping at each other, too smart for their own good, but never quite bright enough to outthink corrupt small-town sheriffs, cantankerous old business owners, or criminals drawn with more muscle than sense. But back to our story. The clown is missing from the circus he works at, so his girlfriend Ayla is concerned, but the circus owner couldn't care less. Richard and Ruth butt in, learning about the missing funny man Daryl, and the two busybodies offer to help. They all climb into their cut-rate mystery machine and head down to the swamp, where they find Daryl almost immediately. He appears in a mysterious spotlight with no discernible origin and leads the group deeper into the swamp. At the same time, the circus owner and his brutish accomplice Trag show up. The clownish Daryl wordlessly taunts them, luring their vehicle off the road and stranding the two men far from town. Soon enough, all of the various characters' paths intersect. Rory, Ruth, and Ayla just kind of run into Man-Thing, who's apparently still carting the dead clown around. So what did they see on the road earlier? The gang manages to wrest the clown from Manny and deliberates over his soggy carcass, but before any resolution can be reached, Trag appears, and in behavior consistent with anyone who only wears one strap to hold their overalls up, throws himself headfirst into the conflict. He gets into it with Man-Thing, who is perturbed by the vibes this guy is putting off. They punch a bit, Manny gets the upper hand, but then something weird happens. The clown's ghost appears? It seems this whole thing has been engineered to get the players in place, and with the swamp as the stage, Daryl and the gang are now going to play out his life story. Okay, I didn't see that coming. The story continues in the next issue, a fact I didn't realize until the book was already slotted, scanned, and edited for this video. If you want to know what happens next, you're just going to have to track down the next issue, or, barring that, you complain enough, maybe I'll review it at a future date. In the end, swamp monsters outlasted the slimy 70s. The 1980s were especially good for some. In addition to his comic finally hitting its stride, the aforementioned Swamp Thing managed 2 movies, a live-action TV show, and a Saturday morning cartoon. Not bad for a dead guy. Man-Thing, meanwhile, crept ever further towards the fringes of the Marvel Universe. But because nature abhors a vacuum, a new generation soon had moss men, shambling mounds, and bog swamp demons. It seems you just can't keep a good swamp man down. For the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Network, I'm Jason Mink. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. If it really dampened your lowlands, maybe consider tossing a few bucks in the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics tip jar. Anything that you throw our way goes towards fumigating this place, theoretically. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week at breakfast.